doesn't consider the thought processes that you have to go through before you actually go out to do what you have to do. So the point here is that the need theory, actually, it's supposed to be a motivation theory, but that does not include the thoughts that you have to go through in terms of the thinking that you have to think through the processes before taking a decision. But if you come to the cognitive theory, the cognitive theory basically acknowledges the fact that there are some thought processes that we will go through before eventually we act in a certain way. So whereas the need theory will be seen as a theory that drives motivation based on a real need, the cognitive theory argues that, well, you have a need, but you need to think about it before you go and then put in the required effort. If you look at, if you can apply it to your studies now, I'm sure at a certain point you decided to, sign up for the MBA program. Perhaps you've seen that there's a need for you to do a master's degree, right? Now, what normally happens, because we do not separate them clearly, these things may not become very obvious to you. But what I mean is that the decision to go and buy the forms or to fill online application and all that, it works very closely with a certain thought process. And so if you look at the motivation behind it, there was an expectation or a need. And this need meant that you go online, get what you have to get in terms of the voucher, and then do the entering of the details and all that. But to be honest, and it may apply to some of you, you may not have thought about the implication quite well. Okay, so even though you have met the need to a large extent by buying the form or getting a voucher and signing on and all that, the thought process is when the action actually begins. Then you begin to realize that, oh, I see, I need to put in a bit more than I originally thought. So there's a kind of a separation between the needs theory, which is also sometimes referred to the content theory, and the cognitive theory, which is referred to as the process theory. So the cognitive theory emphasizes the fact that there's a certain thought process that takes place, knowingly or unknowingly, within us before we decide to take a decision or to go in a certain way. So I want us to start by looking at the first theory, which we refer to as the expectancy theory. The expectancy theory is a theory that was propounded by a researcher by name Victor Vroom. Victor Vroom is a researcher who basically argues that before we get a certain outcome based on our level of motivation, we will first think about the effort required. Okay, so he argues that anything that we do because we are motivated to achieve something, we will naturally consider the effort required. And his first argument says that the effort that he puts in will lead to a certain performance. So the effort will lead to performance, that's number one. And then it says that the performance, number two, will lead to an outcome. So if you look at the Victor Vroom theory, it talks about effort, performance, expectancy. It also talks about performance, outcome, expectancy. So the first point here is that your effort, okay, and your performance will lead to a certain outcome. That's the second point that he makes. But he also makes a third point, and he calls it balance. He calls it balance. And if you look at this third point, it says that anytime we take any decision as to whether to put in an effort, which eventually will lead to an outcome, we will assess and see if the balance is high. When we say the balance is high, it means that it is of really good importance, it's of high importance to us. If we consider the balance to be high, then it means that there's so much in it for us, and therefore we'll put in the requisite skills that are needed and effort that is needed to get the work done. So there are three things that I want you to note about the expectancy theory according to Victor Vroom. Number one, you put in a certain effort. The effort will lead to a performance. Number two, the performance will lead to an outcome. And then number three, it says that the effort that we put in, if indeed we see the outcome to be very important to us, then we put in a lot of effort that eventually will lead to the expected end that we have in mind. So if you apply this to your studies, you notice that for those who see this to be something that is of value, very high value to you, certainly once you sign up to it, you will see it as of importance, but there will be different emphasis from different people. If you put in a lot of effort, okay, eventually you are likely to get a certain kind of outcome. The effort you put in is what will lead to the outcome that you are going to get. So the three things are: effort will lead to performance, and performance will lead to outcome. And then whatever effort you put in, if indeed is of high value to you, then you say that the balance is high. When we say high balance, it means that this thing is really important to me, and then I'm going to put in a lot more so that I can get the outcome expected out of it. So this is the expectancy theory, and it's important that we all understand that these are some thoughts that Vittorum advances. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next, and then I'll pause and take some questions. When I give instructions, I really mean it. So if I say that you ask questions after the lecture, you just, after I finish what I'm doing, you have to keep to that, all right? So no amount of witchery can prevent the crossing of Rubicon. You have to keep to instructions and pay attention, okay? If you tend to be controversial, make sure that you are very good. Because if you are controversial, you are not very good, you will certainly have yourself to blame. So I want us to have look at equity theory. Equity theory is a theory that was advanced by one person by name Adam Stacey. Adam Stacey is also one researcher who advanced the equity theory. And in fact, this equity theory is the thinking behind the single spine salary structure. The single spine salary structure. And the single spine salary structure basically has a certain thought in mind. And the thought is that if I do a certain amount of work, or if I put a certain level of effort, which leads to a certain outcome, and you also put in a certain level of effort and leads to a certain outcome, then we should be paid the same. Okay? So let's take this again. The equity theory says that if what I put in and what comes out of it is the same as what you put in, what comes out of it, then we must be paid the same. Now, what happens if you are not paid the same? According to the equity theory, if we are not paid the same, I get to know that you are being paid more than being paid, it will lead to some tension in me because of the sense of inequity that it creates. So this theory basically argues that there should always be fairness. If there's no fairness, it creates inequity, and then this inequity will lead to tension in individuals. And because of this inequity and the tension that is created, you are naturally forced to deal with this inequity, and therefore people will respond in a way that they have not been known to do in the past. So for example, you've been working for a firm, you are very committed to the firm, you start work at 8, but normally by 7:30 you'll be seated. You close at 5, but sometimes you stay up to about 7:30 before you leave. You enjoy what you are doing. And then you get to know that somebody who is doing almost the same thing as yourself, is being paid more than you are being paid. The interpretation here according to equity theory is that whatever effort you are putting in and the outcome you are getting is the same as this other person's input and outcome. So how come this person is being paid more than you are being paid? That is where the sense of inequity will lead to some tension in you. And therefore, when the tension comes within you because of the sense of inequity that you're experiencing, you try to minimize this tension. And how would you do it? Sometimes we don't think about it along the lines of theory, but what we do is that even though by 7:30 normally you are seated, now you begin to come to work just at 8 as everybody else. the meeting ends or the work ends at 5, and then instead of usually staying longer and doing much more work, you also close at 5. That kind of action minimizes the level of pain that you feel because of that sense of inequity. So if you look at the equity theory, it says that this is associated with the work of Adams. It focuses on people's feelings of how fairly they have been treated compared with the treatment received by others. So we are always comparing the way we are being treated with that of others. And it says that the theory prefers a situation of balance or equity. And when we perceive that the ratio of our input to output to be equal to the ratio of inputs to output in comparison to others, then we want to be treated fairly. What this basically means is that if what I put in and what comes out of it, and what you put in and what comes out of it is the same, then under what circumstances are we being paid differently? That is the bottom line about equity theory. So there are two main issues that comes out from the equity theory. The first argues that when there is a sense of inequity, it will create a tension in us, okay, as I explained earlier. The second also argues that the tension will therefore motivate us to reduce this inequity. And the greater the perceived inequity, the stronger the tension and the greater our motivation to reduce it. The more we feel that we are not being treated fairly, the more we are driven to wanting to do something to appease ourselves by stopping coming to work much earlier than usually it is, and then also just living just as everybody else is living, even though in the past we would have stayed much longer to do a bit more work. And according to the theory, as we do this, yes, it doesn't deal with everything completely, but it minimizes the level of pain that we feel as a result of these actions that we take. So this is the equity theory. Now I want to take the next slide and then I'll pause and take some questions. Now, there's been some interesting ideas that have been put out there as to how to manage this sense of inequity, because we know that it does exist in organizations. These propositions are largely theoretical in nature, but they can also make sense. If you go through it, you'll see that it does make sense to some large extent. If you look at this slide, it talks about strategies for reducing inequity. So let's just make this up. Assuming Kwame is working in the same organization as Amma, and Kwame does the same work as Amma, and then Amma later finds out that Kwame is being paid more than she is being paid. And Amma would then be questioning, but we all start putting the same kind of energy time, and then we get same outcome. So how come is Kwame being paid more than myself? The suggestion is that there are two approaches. There are approaches, there are 7 approaches that we are going to go through. And most times these things play out, even though we have not thought about it in the work scenario. Let's say that when we go to work, at the end of the day, Kwame is supposed to produce 2 loaves of bread. Amma is supposed to produce 2 loaves of bread. The first point says that you must alter your outcomes. The outcomes is the bread that is produced at the end of the day. So Amma complains that I'm doing the same work as Kwame, but Kwame is being paid more. It comes to the attention of the manager. The manager has these options, alter the outcomes. So what that means is that we can say that, all right, what we are going to do is that we are going to ask Kwame to continue to produce 2 loaves of bread, and then we realizing that you are a little bit underpaid, you are going to be producing 1.5 loaves of bread. Okay, that is outcomes. So sometimes the work outcomes can be the source of addressing the inequity, where the one who is earning more is made to churn out more outcomes. So when you alter the outcomes, it means that in this particular example, Amma will no longer be doing 2 loaves as she's been doing in the past. She's now going to be doing 1.5 and Kwame will be doing 2. I'm not saying everybody will agree to this, but for some, they'll be happy with this. Okay, so you have found a way to balance the inequity that is being experienced in AMA, or adjust your inputs. This also inputs refers to the time you put into the work. And we are making an assumption here that whatever outcome comes out is directly linked to the time you put in. Okay, so we have to make that assumption. So it means that if Kwame starts work at 9 and finishes at 5, and Amma starts at 9 and also finishes at 5, now we are going to ask Amma to start at 9 and finish at, let's say, 4 or 3:30. You are adjusting the input. You are adjusting the input. So this is one of the ways you reduce the amount of time that Amma spends at work in comparison to that of Kwame, as a way to reducing the inequity. Okay, so you are trying to reduce the inequity. The third point is similar to the first, but from the other direction. So keeping to the same thing, we start 9, finish at 5, we produce 2 loaves of bread. Alter the comparison person's outcome. What that means is that we are now going to say that, okay, Amma, you are going to maybe do 2 loaves of bread, but the other person is going to do 3 loaves of bread. Same thing, but in a different form. Okay? Or number 4, alter the comparison person's input. You are going to therefore say that, all right, Amma, we all start at 9 and finish at 5. You are going to start at 9 and still finish at 5, but Kwame will start at 9 and finish at 7. These are ways to reducing inequity in the work environment. And then the 5th point, which is quite an interesting way of looking at it, is that, and some managers will do that. They will say that, well, Amma, you are right. Kwame takes much more than you do, but do you also realize that you also take much more than Joyce? Okay, this is a response, but it is not a really good response, because what is the justification for Joyce taking more? It's very important that we explain as managers to our subordinates the decisions we make, especially if in their minds there's not fairness. All right, so it's important that when we compare to somebody else, we go further to give reasons. But that is why the 6th point is there. Rationalize the inequality. And so this is a case where the boss acknowledges that, oh, Amma, yes, it's true that Kwame takes much more than you do. But in this organization, even though you may be having the same qualification and doing the same thing, Kwame actually started 6 months before you. And per our policies, we do acknowledge the contribution of Kwame much earlier, he joining the firm before you. And that's how come he takes a little bit more than you do. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you do not explain and provide solid arguments as to why certain things are being done the way they are being done, you are going to cause a sense of inequity, and it will create tension in people. And that will have impact in terms of the commitment that they bring to the organization. So rationalizing the inequality is where you provide a justification. And I want to emphasize is that it's always important that as a manager, whatever you do, you are able to explain. Yes, you may be the business owner and you think that nobody owes you any explanation, but it's a deception, because whatever you do, ultimately, it's going to impact on the people who actually are being affected. Okay? So, Daniel, I see that you were disrupting the class, and I have been jotting down some list of names. I'm sure you are very much aware of it. I told you earlier on, and I will act on them appropriately. I don't have reverse gear, so when I give instructions, you better take it. I don't go forward and come back, okay? So anytime you disrupt the class, be aware, and I know how to get exactly who the person is. So just take notes, okay? I have some names already, and I'm going to make sure that I penalize those people. All right, so it's very important as a manager to rationalize the inequality. You cannot, say that I choose to do what I want to do. You cannot. You have to explain. If you decide to just do what you want to do, it will also show in the commitment that will come through from your people. So it's a very important thing for organizations to understand that when it comes to how people commit to organizations, There are a whole lot of things that comes to bear, but the key amongst it is the issue of fairness. When we are perceived not to be fair, it has huge impact on people's commitment. And certainly, you don't want people working for you when indeed they are not committed to the goals of the organization the way you want it to be. So this is where I would like to end on this slide. And I'll now open the floor for any questions or comments. If you have any questions, this is the time to ask, and then we can move on. So any comments at all or questions? Yes, Rini, you have the floor.
Sir, please, concerning the adjust your outcomes or adjust the inputs, at this point, are we not telling the person to underproduce? Because if you tell the person to adjust his or her outcome, then we are basically telling the person not to be efficient at work. Is that not what we are telling the person here?
Well, we are not telling you, I'm the manager, I'm telling you, I'm rescheduling your work for you. So it's not like you are the owner of the business and you take your own decision. No, I'm the boss. I come to you to say that, well, yes, we sense the point of inequity. And this happens in organizations. We are very much aware of that. So instead of doing A, B, C, D, we realize that, yes, we are not being fair in a way, but as it stands now, this is the way we want you to understand the issue. We will ask you to come in 1 hour earlier or 1 hour later. It does happen in organizations. So it's not a case of inefficiency. It's a case of acknowledging that you've done more, but we cannot afford to pay that more. So, reduce how much hours you spend. And if you've been following, if you look at the issue of the COVID, one of the ways that organizations actually managed by not laying a lot of people off is to reduce the working hours of people. And when they did that, what they did was that they reduced the salaries. Okay, so they were able to cope with a lot more people than they would normally would do. So it is a practice. It is not a case of fueling inefficiency. It is a way of managing that sense of inequity. All right. So the next hand, Naomi, you can ask your question now.
Thank you, sir. So please, if I understand correctly, that means you are saying these are like options that we can give to the workers and they can choose from.
No, you don't give, the workers don't have an option. You will decide, okay? You understand that? You are the manager. That's what I keep saying, that you are the manager. You are the one who will decide that for this particular case, this is the way I want to go. I would like to be very transparent when it comes to working with people, and I will likely move more towards the rationalization. That means that I'm going to explain to you why the other person is taking more than you are taking. Okay, but normally when we do bring people in and we don't follow due process, and sometimes we give others more than the other person doing the same thing without any justification, that is where we'll be saddled with this. But if I'm involved, I'll always insist that there's fairness in terms of how people get, not so much so that you land yourself into trouble and now you want to find a way of varying what people get in order for you to appease them. So it's not the worker who decides, it's the manager who will come up with a plan. And these are options that I know it does happen in organizations. All right, okay. I see another hand up. Dennis, you can ask your question.
Yes, so it's a good morning. Sorry for interjecting earlier. I wanted to just draw your attention. Last week, for my notes, we ended at motivation. So when it started, I thought you were treating something different. So that's why I raised my hand earlier. So that's
all right, so any question from the class? Okay, so the motivation theory that I want you to know will be the needs theory, which is also referred to as the content theory, and then the cognitive theory as well, which is also referred to as the process theory. I'm very much aware that there's a lot of some slides that you are yet to go through, and I expect that you go through them. I normally will refer students to go through the goal setting theory. This is something that is important. In fact, when you go through, you realize that that is where the argument to always set smart goals come from. Okay, it will interest you to know that challenging goals can lead to a high level of motivation than simple and unchallenging goals. So sometimes we think that when we give people challenging goals, it is not a good thing. Remember, we misconstrue challenging goals with difficult goals. They are not the same. Remember, I explained that challenging goals are goals that will task you to think a little bit more outside the box. You have the skills to do it, but you have to stretch yourself a little bit more to overcome the work. Unlike difficult goals are goals that normally are not being equipped to do it. And therefore, it becomes incredibly difficult for you to start with. And some of you, the occasions where you've been thrown to the wolves, by you being given work that you have no clue where to start from. It is not a good thing. We must equip people to a large extent before we give them assignments. That causes high-level stress, if you remember when we were talking about the issues of organizational stress in our previous lecture. So I want you to go through them and then obviously enhance your knowledge. So I want to end and then move on to what we will be discussing for today, which is lecture 5. So I'll move on to lecture 4 today. All right, so we're going to be discussing organizational culture. And again, organizational culture is something that if you are a manager, you need to be interested in. There are people that we have come across at pretty high places, and sometimes they cannot even put their finger on the culture that exists in the organization. It's important that as a manager, even a worker, you need to understand the culture of your organization. No matter how good you are, if you don't understand the culture, you will find yourself in trouble, or you will never do well in the organization. It's not only about getting first class. It's not only about thinking you are intelligent. It's about culture. There are times that I've sat on panels and people will come for interviews, brilliant ideas, but we see that they will not fit the organization's culture. And therefore, that person will not be recommended, even though you may have displayed brilliance in terms of your submissions and the fact that you can potentially add to the fortunate organization. If you ignore the fact that this person will not fit the culture, that person will come in and become a problem to the organization. So it's not so much about we all have a degree and all that. It's also about, do you fit the culture? Do you fit the culture? If you find yourself in an organization and you do not fit the culture, you will never enjoy that organization because you'll always be landing yourself into controversy. So there's a culture. Anywhere you find yourself, think about culture. The people who do well in the organization will be seen in the right light, will be the ones who are seen to be living the culture. Remember, the cultures normally come from the top. Okay, so if I'm a business owner and I have a certain culture and I see that somebody is living the culture, I'm likely to warm up towards that individual than the one who does not live the culture. Because after all, I want that culture to carry through after I've left the scene. This explains why in some organizations, you think that you are very clever, you know your work very well, but when the time came for promotion, you were bypassed and was given to somebody else. Sometimes when you think about it, you wonder, but this guy is no better than I. So why is that? Well, the answer is that you may not be living the culture of the organization. So culture is absolutely important. And anyone who ignores the culture of the place that you want to work and to progress, you do so at your own expense. So it's very important for us to have this knowledge. When you walk into an organization, take pains to understand the do's and don'ts of the organization. Take pains to understand what counts when it comes to how things are done around here. Because no matter how good you are, if you do not learn to live with the culture, you know, even our own setting, we must understand even more than anyone else that culture is very important. You cannot disrespect the culture of any group in Ghana here of the 16 regions. You cannot. You'll be called to attention no matter who you are. Even the president of the land does not disrespect the cultures of places when he goes to the palaces, you go to the Volta region, you go to the Ashanti region, you go to the Eastern region. Some of these places, you have to go and see the in charge, the people there. There's a certain culture, okay? So culture is very important. And I cannot emphasize it more enough. Number of times that people have suffered this because they have not learned to keep to the culture of the place they find themselves in. Very, very important. Just like I've been talking about, There's a certain culture I'm being preached here, a culture of being attentive to detail and to making sure that you do not disrupt the class. Because if you think about it, in real class scenario, nobody can come to your class and come and talk to you. You cannot. When I enter the class, everything goes quiet. Nobody disturbs. That is my culture. Okay? And if you decide to go against it, you are going against my culture, and there is a price for it. So it's very important to have that understanding that culture matters. No matter how you see it, culture matters. So now let's look at what we mean by culture. So it says that organizational culture is a system of shared values. Values are preferences. Every organization has got values. The question is, do you know the values of your organization? Do you know the preferences? The fact that you work for EcoBank and now you are working for Fidelity does not mean that we'll do the EcoBank stuff in Fidelity. They are different values, but even though they are the same industry. Values are preferences, the way we want things to be done. That is what values are. Okay, so we can do it in another way, or A approach or B approach, but we prefer the B approach. It does not mean the A approach is wrong, but that is our value. That is what we want to do. Okay, so you cannot say that I have done it this way and therefore I want it to be done the other way. I want to do the same way in the new place. Remember, I said to you that I have a certain approach that when I do not go through, because I have a lot of information for you, I think that it's not only about coming to pass the exam and go, it's about getting the knowledge. What's the use of a manager who doesn't know anything? So I seek to give you information that you can also go through and enhance yourself and be solid at what you do. But if I do not explain, I will not examine you on it. And I remember I said to you that you do not use this same principle on my colleagues. Okay, some of them, you will not even be given the point. They will tell you where to read, the things to consider, the topical areas, and that's it. Right. You can't say that Professor Dartey, when he doesn't explain and he asks us to read, he doesn't examine. I mean, if you do that, you have yourself in difficulty. So all I'm trying to say is that shared values are preferences. These are my preferences, okay? You cannot change those preferences to organizations when it comes to how they want things to be done. Assumptions are things that are normally not discussed, but everybody knows that it exists. Everybody knows that it plays out. It plays out. You know, I'll come back to this again in the last point here on this slide. Beliefs, in fact, it should be B-E-L-I-E-F-S. Beliefs are set in stone. They are set in stone. They are not like values. Values are preferences. I can do it the EcoBank way or I can do it the Fidelity way. Okay, these are preferences. It doesn't hurt. Even though I'm saying to you that you might, if it's EcoBank, do it EcoBank way. If it's Fidelity, do it Fidelity way. If it's University of Ghana, do it University of Ghana way. You cannot say that, well, in tech, we do it like this, so it should be the same University of Ghana. It's not going to work, and vice versa. So values are preferences, how we want it to be done. But beliefs is more serious. They are moral absolutes. Beliefs are moral absolutes. They are non-negotiable. We don't take any other. This is firmly ingrained. There's no scope margin of error. They are moral absolutes. Okay? And norms are standards. Norms are standards. Every organization has got its own standards. These are the things that will normally form organizational culture. So even though we do not pick these things one after the other, they exist in organizations. Organizations have got preferences, they have got values. Okay? Why is it that your organization seeks to do business with one particular firm all the time? These are their preferences. There's nothing wrong doing business with another one, but they emphasize that when it comes to this, always work with this other person. These are preferences, these are shared values. Assumptions are the hidden things, not so obvious things, but they exist in the organization. I'll come back to this shortly. Beliefs are non-negotiables, moral absolutes. Norms are standards. And what are these all supposed to do? They are supposed to unite the members of the organization. It means that as long as you work for this organization, these things, we must all buy into it. We must all buy into it. Nobody can go outside this. You can try, but it's going to be at a cost. Okay, so understand that culture is absolutely important. Organizational culture is also referred to as corporate culture. Corporate culture. It's also referred to as the internal environment of the organization. So when we talk about the internal environment of organization, we are referring to the corporate culture. Corporate culture. Now, when we talk about culture, culture is how things are done around here. For every environment, things are done in a certain way. How things are done around here. Okay, and it goes on to say that it is what is typical of the organization. What is typical of the organization? What is it typical of the organization? Is explained the habits, the prevailing attitudes, the grown-up pattern of accepted and expected behaviors. Organizations are like human beings. They have habits. They have prevailing attitudes. They have matured ways of doing things. But let's take this again. It says that culture is how things are done around here. It goes back to reinforce the point that I've made. Every organization has a way they want things to be done. Be aware of that. And you see, it will be very sad for you to have knowledge and not to take advantage of the knowledge. There are some who work into organizations and they care less about how things are done in that organization. And there are some who have also acquired knowledge, such where you are sitting, and they care less about how things are done in the organization. It's very sad. I hope it's not be your story. That after acquiring knowledge, you don't use the knowledge to your advantage, because there will be a distinction. There will be a distinction. And I have numerous examples and experiences of this, where people are good, but they don't do things the way it's done where they are, and therefore they suffer for it. But then it says that it is what is typical of the organization. When we say typical in pure English language, it means that what else would you expect from this person? It is typical. It's second nature. It doesn't surprise us at all. It is what is typical. So somebody does something, we say that typical. It means that, well, what else would you expect or could you have expected from this person? What else could you have expected from this person? This is typical. This is typical. So it means that there is something that is very unique to every organization that is typical of the organization. You have to take pains to find out, because the movers and shakers of organizations tend to watch and look out for those who are living what they expect the organization to do. The habits, the way things are done, remember that organization involve two or more people engaged in a systematic effort to produce goods and or services. This means that it's about people. There are certain habits, there are certain known attitudes. Attitudes like we are the best in this industry. When you mention our organization, we are the front runners, we are the ones in charge. And if you know that you are in an organization that is the most respected in the industry, it has impact on how you see yourself. It has impact on how you feel and how you come across. When you engage other people in the same industry, you feel very good because you are the market leaders. It's the same thing. When I'm sure some of you will talk proudly about the fact that, well, I'm doing my master's at the University of Ghana Business School. There's a certain attitude that comes with it. Why? Because it's a premium business school, whether you like it or not. Okay, so by the attitudes of the organization that you find yourself in, there are certain behaviors that we see that really comes through because of where we find ourselves. So organizations are basically human beings coming together, working towards a certain goal and a certain objective. And therefore, if there's a certain accepted norm, ways of doing things, and you go contrary to it, it can lead to some difficulty. But let's look at the last point. It says that the grown-up pattern of accepted and expected behaviors, the grown-up pattern, matured pattern of accepted. This means that there are certain things that are very much known in the organization. Let me explain the reason behind why I'm bolding the accepted and expected. There's some organization that it is known across board that when you get in the morning, you can just get to the kitchen and get yourself some cereals or some breakfast. Okay, the organization will provide for tea, bag and sugar everything, bread and everything. You can go and get yourself some breakfast. If you want to have some cereals, you have it. Some organizations do that. It's accepted for you to go into the kitchen once you get in and go and get something to eat. Even sometimes throughout the day, of course, at specific time during lunch and all that. It's accepted that you can even walk into the canteen and take some lunch, and then it's noted against the organization that will be paid later on. It's accepted. But watch this. It's also expected that, for example, if you are going to the kitchen to get yourself a cup of tea, you ask your colleague, do you mind for a cup of tea? Or do you mind for a glass of water? So you just do not get to the kitchen and get yourself alone a glass of water without asking a colleague. I have worked in an organization like that, where even the managing director, my boss of the unit, can come to my desk and say to me, Kwesi, do you mind for a glass of water or a cup of tea? And based on this, if I say I want a glass of water, the boss of the unit will get to the kitchen and will bring in you a glass of water. That is a culture, it's expected. It's not written anywhere, but it's expected. What I want you to be aware of is that normally the accepted is talked about. The expected things do not be talked about. But if you go against the expected, you are going to pay for it. All of a sudden, you see that, well, this person is rude. How come you go and get yourself without asking your colleagues and all that? And all of a sudden, your commitment and how hard working you are does not even matter. As if it's about getting people a glass of water and cup of tea, but unfortunately, that is expected behaviors. Organizations like things to be done in a certain way. And this fits into this habits thing that we are talking about organizations. So be very much aware that organizational culture is a big deal. It is a big deal. And therefore, anyone who is into management must take interest in the issue of culture. I want to go through the next few slides, and then I'll pause and take some comments from you. So I'll go through these 7 characteristics and I'll take some comments from you. This is the characteristic that captures the essence of organizational culture. And what I mean by the essence of organizational culture is that there are some 7 points that we are going to go through now. And for some of you, it may apply to your organization. When you see that, it should reveal to you a certain culture that may be at work in organization when it comes to how work is done. Okay, when it comes to how work is done in the organization. So the first point, and before I even go through, let me make this point that you can have more than one of these playing out within organization. So the first point talks about innovation and risk-taking. Innovation and risk-taking. And it says that it's the degree of employee empowerment to be innovative and take risks. What it is saying is that there are some organizations that have a culture of encouraging innovation and risk-taking. They empower employees. They actually encourage you to think outside the box, and they are supportive of you. Okay? They are supportive of you. They ask you to be innovative and to take risks on behalf of the organization. They are supportive of you. There are some who work in organizations that are not empowered. Okay, when you are not empowered, you have to seek permission for everything that you do. Everything your boss will like to go through, micromanage basically. Anytime you micromanage people who do not want to be micromanaged, they do not enjoy the work environment. So when you find yourself in an organization where you are being asked you are being micromanaged in a way that is unthinkable to you, you will not enjoy that work environment. That culture will not fit your personality. Unless you are able to adapt to that culture, you always go to work not enjoying the work environment. I'm sure some of you can attest to this. So innovation and risk-taking is an organization that empowers the workers to be able to novel in their thinking. Number 2, attention to detail. That's organizations that you are going to be told that, look, over here, roughly right is not acceptable. You must be perfectly right. You must be absolutely right. Attention to detail. You must be precise in whatever you do. We do not, assume that, well, 0.9 is the same as 1. No, we do not. 0.9 is 0.9. You cannot run it off like that. Attention to detail. And there are some aspects of the work in the banking sector that attention to detail is very important. Largely, some of the activities there requires attention to detail. You cannot say that I've paid in 5,050 pesos, and you just say that, well, 50 pesos is, let's just enter 5,000. No, attention to detail. Even if it's 5,051 pesos, the 51 pesos must appear. That's attention to detail. That's a culture. Okay, so imagine, you think about it. Imagine that you find yourself an organization that emphasizes attention to detail, and then you are in the habit of just rounding up numbers or dropping certain numbers. Certainly, it will not be favorable to you. You get it? And then outcome orientation. This speaks to organizations that will only focus on results rather than outcomes. They only care about the results or outcome rather than the processes. That's the point I want to make. When you are outcome oriented, it means that I'm only interested in the final results. I care less about the processes. As long as we are making profit, if only 1 or 2 people suffer something, that is okay. Some organizations, somehow, by the way they operate, that's how they think. That's how they think. People are losing their lives. People are damaging their lives. Let's say you work in the construction industry, and your work involves having to drill into concrete and using machines that vibrating machines cause a lot of noise. There's no protection for your ears, so much dust and all that. Once we get the results, and we see all these things around, the process does not matter, it's the outcomes. If you are somebody who is very firm in your thoughts in terms of ensuring that things are done well, and you like things to follow a certain kind of order, and ensuring that there's decency in the work environment and all that, you struggle under an organization that preaches outcome orientation. If we have to make money at the expense of other people's difficulty or even their lives, then there is a problem. That is outcome orientation. Just below it, we have people orientation. This is the type of organization that is so much interested in people, the degree to which management decisions focus on people within the organization. Yes, we want to make profit, but at what cost? At what cost? At what cost? We want to think through to make sure that even though we are going to make profit, we don't want people's lives to suffer. We don't want people's lives to suffer. I was listening to a discussion on BBC somewhere last week about the issues of remote working, and some of the points that is being talked about is the fact that people seem to be doing a lot more remotely to a large extent than when they were coming to the office. Okay, so there's this thinking that remote working is actually giving value. Remote working, please let me quickly notify. Hello, Prof. Morning. Sorry, I'm back. I was getting a call from my senior colleague, so sorry, I had to quickly pick it up. But the point is that people orientation means that we care very much about the people. You see, we care very much about the people. And I was saying about this organization that people are saying that we are now doing a lot more work because we are working remotely. All the journey times is being saved and being dedicated to the work and all that. And some people even are taking pride in the fact that they are able to wake up at midnight to work and all that. And then the boss of the organization that this kind of submissions were coming from came up to say that, look, we are not asking you to work around the clock. We are not asking you to work at midnight because you choose to do so. We are not asking you for you to not to step out to do some exercise or to have a walk around. We want you to balance your work and your quality of life also. And this boss was so much concerned about the fact that, look, we need a resource, but we also are mindful of your health. This is a people-oriented organization. The truth is that, as they say, what goes around comes around. If you work yourself to death, it will come back to the organization. So it's important for us to understand that when we look out for people, eventually it benefits the organization. So people-oriented organizations are the ones that will be careful to ensure that as they get results, it's not done at the health and at the expense of their workers. But you and I know that some organizations out there, they care less about the people. All they think about is the profits that they are going to make. They care less. That is not a people-oriented organization. It's more of an outcome-oriented organization. These are cultures that are working in some organizations. Let me take the next three, and then I'll pause and take some comments. Then we also have team orientation. It talks about organizations that basically emphasize the culture of teamwork. You remember when we had the first lecture, we spoke about the fact that in contemporary organizations, teamwork is very much of importance. They emphasize teamwork. Teamwork is fundamental to the works in contemporary organizations. And remember, I spoke about the fact that that is why organizations these days lean more towards the flat structure, because in the flat structure, there's a lot more cohesion and synergy building. Okay, so it's very important for us to understand that teamwork plays important role in organizations, and therefore some cultures will not compromise teamwork, coming together, working together to achieve a common goal. You know that if you're into football, you know that sometimes people are brought into football teams based on the fact that this person can fit well into this team's culture, or this team's way of playing football, doing things. The emphasis is on teamwork. As another point that comes to mind as I speak to this is the same example that I gave about what I heard about the manager that was interviewed on the BBC about virtual working. And you know one other thing that came out from that interview as I listened to it? What came out of it is that even though people may want to work from home and obviously mindful of COVID and all that, when this whole COVID thing started, most people thought that offices and all that are not going to matter any longer. It will not be the case, because you see, human beings are being built in such a way that we like to interact. We like to interact. We like to mix up with other people. We like to see people face to face. That is why in the midst of all the COVID, yes, we are cautious in terms of stepping out and all that, but we still like to interact. That is how we have been wired. So this concept that all of a sudden offices will not matter, it is an illusion. Offices will matter. Bricks and mortar will still matter. Why? Because we are social entities. Remember, one of the characteristics of an organization. An organization is a social entity. It requires interaction. Remember, it requires interdependence. I need to depend on you physically in the work environment, not virtually. And in listening to this interview, one other profound thing that I got from this manager that spoke about the COVID and virtual working and all that was the fact that they have also realized that because people are working in their individual silos virtually, they are losing on the culture of teamwork. People coming together to bounce ideas. And I remember clearly one thing that this person said. He spoke about the fact that it's impacting on our innovation, our level of innovation and ingenuity. The fact that you can walk to the next person across the desk to have a discussion with this person. It is impacting on it. So what they're proposing is that instead of coming 5 days in a week, it should be about 2 to 3 days in a week. Okay, maximum 3 days. But for 0 days in the office, it's not something that they're encouraging. Why? Because they want people to come together to interact and to innovate and to generate ideas, which normally does not happen when you are working virtually. So these are real issues that are being picked up following the COVID experience that we've all come through. Yes, we are doing this virtual teaching, which is good, but I can say to you that it will even be better when you have physical engagements, okay? And we do hope that before your second year, you'll be able to engage. And the benefits of that direct engagement with people is enormous. It's enormous. You get to form relationships and networks that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Very, very important. So teamwork here, I'm emphasizing to say that as we come together, not that we cannot work as a team virtually, but it's not the same. I can almost say that to you. It's not the same when we come together and we indeed work as a team, when we depend on each other, because organizations are social entities. The next bit is aggressiveness, and it speaks to the level of aggressiveness and competitiveness encouraged in organization rather than easygoing. What this means is that we are talking about organizations that tend to be very competitive in their outlook, and they encourage aggressiveness, not you attacking anybody, but you must be very out there and be very determined to appear to be conquering the world and all that, and taking over and showing forth the way and all. These things are good, but you must be very careful, because what we do know that when you encourage aggressiveness and then competitiveness, much as it's good to compete against your competitors in the environment that you find yourself in, we must be careful because it gets translated into the work environment, so that you see colleagues competing among themselves. When you do that, people begin to hold back on information. People are not very open with information, and that can also work against organization. So what I'm trying to say is that if your model is aggressiveness and really going for it and all that, yes, if it works for you, fine. But you must also be very careful, because when you encourage that in the work setting, people begin to compete instead of being supportive of each other. It has the tendency to break down the synergy that otherwise will be existing in the organization. And sometimes the marketing approach of some organizations are so aggressive in nature because they want to conquer the world. I remember that years back, when Glo came into the telecommunication industry kind of space, there were a number of people who left their their place of work somewhere in the telco industry. They went because Glo was then offering very good deals. And the posture of Glo, if you remember, they started digging up almost everywhere and laying cables and all that, trying to take over in a big way. And a lot of people went there because they were paying well, but there are some people who, after they've gotten there, they have to leave. They left because some of them were complaining that the level of aggressiveness that is required of them in terms of their marketing activities, was so much that they could not cope with it. Yes, some were able to cope because it fits their personality, but others could not. So what I'm saying is that aggressiveness may be your model, but then you must be careful the people you hire. Because if you do not think about it deeply, you may bring people on board, but you lose them, because by their nature, they will not be able to cope with the level of drive that is required of them. Then the final point I want to make here is stability. Stability speaks to organizations that are happy with the norm, the degree to which organizational activities emphasize maintaining the status quo in contrast to growth. They are happy with what they are doing, typical of public sector organizations. They are not driven by growth. They are just there doing what they have to do, just doing just enough. Just enough. They are not thinking about growth. Not to say that some private sector organizations do not practice this. They do, but they are certainly in the minority. I know of a friend who has a business, and he has decided not to grow. And the reason why he doesn't want to grow is that he says that he's happy with what he's doing, he's happy with the amount of business that he has, and the stress levels with what he does is just enough for him to cope, and that he does not want to take on more stress. So he's not going to grow, because the more growth comes in, the more stress he's going to bear. I have a problem with that mindset. If you drive your business as a one-man or one-woman business, then sometimes this becomes an issue. But if indeed you see opportunities and you want to grow, then you can grow by making sure that you bring on board others who can capture and push through your culture, empower them to do it on your behalf. So there's a way of going around this stability thing. But the point I want to make is that irrespective of the opportunities that are out there, some people will want to do exactly what they do or they have been doing for the past 10 years because they are happy with their norm. They don't want to do anything outside their norm. So I've said quite a bit, and I want to pause right now and take questions and comments if you have any, and I'm quite happy to explain them. So this is time for questions to be asked. If you have a question, please, you can ask, and then I'll be happy to explain. Okay, so we are now going to move on. If there are no questions, we are going to move on to the next, which is talks about types of culture, types of culture, types of culture. This is actually the foundation to organizational culture, the types of cultures that exist in organizations. And if you listen carefully and you followed the 7 characteristics that I just went through, you will notice that some of these points that we are going to be touching on shortly, they play out in the 7 characteristics somehow. So let's look at the first culture that was propounded by Charles Handy. The first is what we call the power culture. And by the way, there are 4 of such, but the first 3 are what normally pertains in organizations. The first 3 are the ones that normally pertains to organizations. They are the ones that you see a lot in organizations playing out. Power culture. So when we talk about power culture, that refers to organizations that tend to be very political in nature, and everything comes and is controlled by one person at the center. So you have one person that everything revolves around this person. The decisions of this individual is what will carry the day. Whatever the person says or thinks is what will stand. That is power culture. So you can see that I say that this is very political. It revolves around a central power source. And this kind of culture is normally found in small entrepreneurial organizations. It's found in smaller businesses. The power culture organization, they have few rules or procedures. Everything comes from the central person. So there are no many rules. They don't need to confer with anyone. They take the decisions and that's it. So there are few rules and procedures. They emphasize results rather than means. You see, watch this. Power cultures emphasize results rather than means. It's similar to the outcome culture or outcome orientation. You see, in the outcome orientation, they are so much interested in the results rather than the means. So normally, power cultures think about the results rather than the processes you go through to getting the results. And this is typical of smaller businesses. What are the advantages? The advantages of the power culture is that we say that they are proud and strong organizations. Proud and strong organizations. That means that these organizations that are able to take decisions when they have to take. They are not organizations that drag their feet. They act. Why is that? Because it's about one person anyway. I don't need to call for a quorum to be formed before we take a decision. I don't necessarily need any other person's view. So they are able to react well to threats or danger. They can take decisions when it matters. They don't have to delay at all. That's why we call them to be proud and strong organizations. What will be the disadvantage of such an organization? The disadvantage is that such organizations are only as good as their leaders. Think about it. If you have a culture or you are perpetuating a culture that revolves around one central person, then if you get somebody who is not good and that person is so powerful, we are all going to run into a ditch. So power cultures can work, but it's important to have a leader who is thorough, a leader who is good, who knows what he or she is about. So he says that the disadvantage is that the organization will be as good as their leaders. Power cultures have problems with increased organizational size and complexity. It means that if you want to carry through the power culture, then you are going to have a problem as organization increases. As if, let's say, if you are a boss of about 10 people, you can easily manage the power culture, but as the organization grows to about 100, it becomes a bit more difficult to manage it. That is why we say that it has problem with increased organizational size and complexity, and with management succession. So one of the ways that organizations that want to carry through power culture can operate is that instead of having 100 people, you break them into groups of 10. And then for each of these groups, you pick up a leader. And normally when it comes to picking up the leader, it's not so much of the one who is the most cleverest among the lot. It's more about the one who can understand and you believe can live the culture that you want to carry through. Then when you have picked these 10 people, one for each of the 10 groups, you engage these 10 people at a deeper level, sort of brainwashing them for them to go and brainwash the others on your behalf. So as organizations become bigger, if the power culture is what you want to perpetuate, then you need leaders who be like you. You train them, you develop them to be like you, and you empower them to lead the other groups in a way that will be similar, at least closer to what you have in mind. Okay? And in that way also, you are able to bring somebody among the leaders that you've trained to succeed you in the long term, so that the culture lives on after you've left the scene. On the other side of it, when you have a leader who is not very good at the helm of affairs, then that's going to be a huge problem, because the person is endowed with all this power and all this influence. And therefore, when they take decisions, nobody challenges. But then it does not help us because that person is not well empowered. It's not well endowed with the knowledge that the person needs. Yes, you may be empowered, but it may not be well endowed in terms of the knowledge and the capacity to lead. Remember, not all leaders have the capacity to lead. All right. So if you want to perpetuate the power culture, let's make sure that the people that we put in places of influence and of power, they have what it takes to lead us. All right. So this is the power culture. And I want us to look at the next one, role culture, and then I'll pause and take some comments if there are, and then we can move on to the next. Role cultures are, on the other hand, more bureaucratic in nature. They follow rules and procedures, very typical of the public sector, extremely bureaucratic in their engagements. So bureaucracy is at the core of the role culture. It says that the job description is important than the one who fills it. This statement is a sarcastic statement. So what this actually means is that we are interested in the one who can just follow the procedure, not so much from the one who would be able to do the job. You see, so it's a job description, do just as you have been told. And if you know, in the public sector, people will not cross their boundaries. They will tell you that the person who sits next to them, who is supposed to be working on an assignment but has been on leave, and even though they can step in, they will tell, in their mind, it's not their job. So they will tell you to come in next month when the person is in before they do the work or before you get your response. Because they are keeping to their job description. They do not step outside their boundaries. The job description is important than the one who fills it. That is the role culture. The advantage of the role culture is that they tend to be very stable because the processes are clear. So there's no ambiguity. We have stability. There's also continuity because, you know, when you start something, you don't end. I know where to continue from because the steps are clear. Because the clarity that comes with the steps, it is very easy for you to continue from where somebody ends. There's also uniformity when it comes to role culture because same argument, we are following processes. Now, the thing that I've seen that sometimes people wonder about is when I talk about efficiency and technical expertise. Sometimes we do think that the public sector, we don't have efficient people there, we don't have people with technical expertise. Well, it's an erroneous impression if we have that impression. The public sector have some of the finest brains out there in terms of technical expertise, in terms of efficiency. And some of the reasons that accounts for this is that because of procedures, they've done the same thing over and over again, and therefore they have become efficient at it. They've done the same thing over and over again, and they've built their expertise in these kind of areas. So that is one of the reasons why you are likely to see efficiency and technical expertise at work within the public sector. The reason why sometimes we doubt this is that these people, even though they know what to do, they are not in a hurry. That is a key difference between the kind of work that those in the public sector normally will engage in and those in the private sector. The private sector is mindful of the investment and they want to recoup and get their monies back. But the public sector, we have that like a daisical attitude towards work most times. And therefore, we end up being inefficient, even though we can be efficient. We have seen organizations that have tried to review their engagements, how they work, and we see how they stick up in terms of the delivery and the services that they render to people. So be aware that efficiency and technical expertise is not in the wrong place when we talk about role culture. The role culture also ensures that there's high levels of control and accountability. Why? Because we know the processes, so it can be held to account. So high levels of control and accountability is very much alive with the role culture. The disadvantage, again, is that because they like to follow processes, it kills innovation, it kills ingenuity. Role cultures tend to be inflexible in their outlook. They tend to be inflexible. No matter the ideas you have, if you are not following the process, it does not mean anything to them. So there's lack of innovation. It stifles initiative, and they are not able to deal with crisis as it is in the case of the power culture. Why? Because we are following the process. Haven't you heard or haven't you come across scenarios where decisions might be taken much quicker than expected, and then we just slow down because we are following the process? That is why things take forever when you are dealing with the public sector, because they like following processes. They like the bureaucracy, they enjoy the processes, okay? And these are the disadvantage, the kind of disadvantages that comes with the role culture. So I would like to pause again. If there's anything I've said about the first two cultures and you want clarity, you have the floor to ask your question, and I'll be happy to explain before we continue. So I'll pause a moment to see if there are any comments from the class. Yes, Francis.
Say, prior to the power culture, the disadvantage, you say it is as good as its leader. There is a disadvantage, and I wanted to clarify it for me.
Okay. Yes, I explained it by saying that if you talk about the power culture, in the power culture, you have individuals who have full control. They have full control. Okay, they have full control over what they do. They do not take instruction from anyone. Everything revolves around them. And therefore, if they have so much power and they are good, they will take good decisions that will work for the organization. So how good organization is will be as good as the leader. That's what I mean. If you have so much control, so much power is vested in you, and you are not a good leader, then we are in trouble. That is what it means. So that's why we say that they are as good as their leaders, okay? Because of the power that they have. If you do not have so much power, then, well, if you do the wrong thing, perhaps we can just come and correct it. But if all power is vested in you and you're a bad leader, then everybody will be in difficulty. So that is what I actually meant. Ambrose.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Prof. Prof, with regards to the power culture, you said they exist mostly in small enterprises. But nowadays, you found out that most big organizations have board chairmen who wants to establish their offices on the premises of the organizations and want everything to be channeled through them. I mean, board chairman. So are these entities not also under power culture? I mean, there's some of these big multilateral organizations. Thank you.
Yes. So, I mean, the point is that power culture, yes, is very much seen in smaller businesses, but you're right. I mean, it's not out of place to see large multinational organizations actually practicing the power culture. In fact, if you step into the space of international human resource management, when it comes to the orientations of senior managers, there are three cultures that they perpetuate. They have what we call the egocentric orientation. Number one, ethnocentric orientation. Number two, they are what we call polycentric or regiocentric orientation. And number three, they are what we call geocentric orientation. These are different views, orientations of senior managers. The first orientation, which is the ethnocentric orientation, is the orientation where everything that is done in the subsidiaries must be as it is at the headquarters. These are power culture orientations. Okay, so yes, power cultures can also play out in large organizations. And the example you gave is more like an egocentric orientation of multinationals. So it's not only the reserve or the preserve of smaller entrepreneurial businesses, but they are typically seen in these ones. Sometimes organizations can come across to have a certain posture. I think I may have made that point in the past, that if you hear of, let's say, Ministry of Defense, okay, they are so much seen to be power culture, okay, but it's not a small business. They are very quick at decisions they take. They are very resolute when they decide, they go for it and all that. But when they get into the ministry, you are likely to see certain units that are much more, they move much more from power culture to something else. Again, let me say that it's not only a case that power culture will only work for one, it's only going to be for one. It's also going to be possible for you to practice more than one culture. So it's not a case of, just power culture and nothing else. Other things can also come together. You can have a role culture at work as well as power at the same time. So I've given you much more responses than I'm sure you may have asked for. But Ambrose, it's not out of place to see large organizations also practicing power culture. So that's the point I want to make.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so let's move on then. Another culture I want us to look at is the task culture. Task culture. Task culture is a culture that emphasizes teamwork. Heavy reliance on teamwork. So anytime you see an organization that is drumming in so much into teamwork, it's likely to be practicing a task culture. If you go back to the discussion that we had, remember about the characteristics, we have the team orientation. Okay, so it is the same thing we are talking about. The task culture, heavy reliance on teamwork, collaboration, and they encourage teamwork. So it means that there are some organizations that is a big deal for them. If you work with them, you must be more of a team player. Those who hold a teamwork mentality, they share the view that with the team, you can overcome any difficulty. So they utilize the unifying power of the group. You know, if you look at a number of consulting firms, from my experience, consulting firms normally, they do not go in for work necessarily because they have done that work before. But they have this view that once we have the team, we can think through and solve the problem. They utilize the power of the group to do the work. That is why sometimes they go in for work. As they get into it deeper, they see that, well, this area, we don't have the expertise. So they will now co-opt some others into it to be able to get the work done. It happens a lot in consulting firms because they lean more toward the task culture. The advantage of the task culture is that because you are relying on each other to solve the problem, there's flexibility. There's also adaptability. People can adapt to views and opinions that are different from what they hold. We see ourselves as a team. So the idea may not be coming from me, but it's okay because it's going to work for us as a team. So adaptability is one of the hallmarks of the task culture. Similarly, remember that anytime you bring a team together, you encourage innovation. You encourage innovation. So innovation is also at the core of the task culture. The key to being innovative in an organization is to have a team, innovation and development unit, or have a team of people who are consistently looking out for what your competitors are doing and how you can outwit your competitors. Okay, so you must always be thinking, do not look away from what the competitors are doing. Always pay attention to what they are doing and ask yourself, how can we overcome this? How can we come up with a better response? Look at the telcos. If you like, pay attention to the Vodafones and the MTNs. They are always doing what the other person is coming out with. That is task culture approach. You try to always be innovative. You try to respond to what your competitor is putting up. If you do not do that, you lose out in the market and become irrelevant. So task cultures always encourage and emphasize teamwork. In fact, in a task culture environment, when you come to work today, you can be working with team A, but when you go to work tomorrow, you could be asked to go and work and assist team B or team C. They are so flexible in terms of allocation of work, but there's a certain downside to it, and that takes us to the disadvantages. We say that it has little day-to-day control. What does that mean? That means that normally in task cultures where we emphasize teamwork, the little day-to-day control means that when I leave home today, I may plan or I may have planned to go and work on a certain assignment, but when you get there, you can be asked to do something else. So sometimes you don't have full control on what you do daily. That is a little day-to-day control. Now, when you are always moving from one group to the other and your efforts are not well focused, it has the propensity to lead to lack of in-depth expertise. So that is also one of the perceived disadvantages, but there's a way around this. People can still be part of the task culture, but as we move them, we intentionally move them to groups that will help them go deeper in one area. So if you are helping with writing reports in group B and you move to group C, we can deepen your knowledge in that area by just focusing you on activities that borders on writing reports. Okay, so there's a way around using task cultures. I am more for task cultures because you can do much with a team than people working as individuals. Let me also make this point that there's also some value in using task cultures, if perhaps it's not captured in this slide. As I was just talking to you, one of the things that came to my thoughts is the fact that, you know, when you work in an organization, it's important to have an idea about what happens in the other units. So you are working in, let's even keep to HR, for example. Some well-established organizations, HR has been broken up into 3 or 4 units. If you come to the University of Ghana, the HR unit is the Human Resource and Organization Development Directorate, HROD. This is the directorate that handles all HR issues in the university. But when you get to HROD, you enter HROD, they have a unit for training and development. So there's someone whose work centers only on training and development. You see, in the HROD unit, there's also a unit that focuses on selection and placement. That is recruitment, selection, and placement. These are the ones who will go through the recruitment processes, select and place people appropriately. There's also a unit that deals with compensation issues. These are all facets of human resource management. So even though they all sit under the big umbrella, the big picture, there are different aspects of it. In fact, if you want to push furthermore, in human resource management, we also have industrial relations. Industrial relations is the aspect that seeks to look at the relationship that exists between the employer and the employee. So that the labor groups, the labor relations. And in fact, there are some people in human resource management that focuses only on industrial relations. You get it? In fact, there's also another thing that comes to mind. There are some who are only into performance management and performance appraisals. These are different units under just this specialty. So if you are practicing the task culture, you get the point now. So you can, let's keep to this example. I think it just hit my thought, but I think it's a very beautiful example. You can move from, let's say today you are working with the recruitment, selection, and placement team. When you go to work tomorrow, you can be working with the training and development team. When you go to work tomorrow, you can be working with the industrial relations team, then compensation team. So you see that when we emphasize teamwork, we see everybody to be in a pool. There's no clear demarcations. And therefore, we will bring you on board as and when you are needed by a particular team. That will be a typical example of a task culture where there's flexibility of moving, but you see, you have little day-to-day control on what you do. Because today you are working on A, tomorrow you're going to be B, and all that. If you keep operating like that, there's a tendency that you may not have a lot of depth in one area. That is why we talk about potential lack of in-depth expertise. But the reason why I went for this example is also from the, if you look from the other side of it, if you are in HR, it's also very important for you to have breadth as well as depth. Breadth of knowledge and depth of knowledge. Breadth of knowledge is having that general knowledge across board, as well as your depth of knowledge, which is your niche, what distinguishes you from the others. It's very important that in whatever industry we find ourselves in, we have both breadth and depth. Task culture can give you breadth of knowledge, but we're also saying that we must, as part of benefiting from it, we must be intentional along the line to also go depth, which means that even though I've worked with HR compensation, I've worked with HR recruitment and selection, HR training and development, compensation, industrial relations, I've gone around them. I'm also going to be focused perhaps on training and development. So I'm going to be doing more in training and development. That gives you the depth in the area. So as much as you have the breadth of knowledge, you also have a depth of expertise. This is very, very important. In fact, this is what HR will normally call it job rotation, where you move from one unit to the other. And some of you will attest, maybe you are in accounting, Your expertise is perhaps in auditing, okay? But it's possible that the organization that you work for, you'll be doing other things like taxation and all those associates, okay? So they'll move you from one unit, from taxation to auditing to which other branches that you have within the field. It's supposed to give you breadth of knowledge, okay? So that would be job rotation within that industry. But then you yourself, you have aspiration to be more of an auditor, to go deeper in audit. So you go deeper in audit. So task culture preaches and emphasizes teamwork very much. But I'm saying that the perceived disadvantage can be turned around to be an advantage. It's just like, again, another example, you work for a civil engineering company, okay? You work for a civil engineering company as a civil engineer. When you join the organization, you are brought into the civil engineering unit. And this happens normally when you are very young and you join the firm, and we want you to normally get a feel of all the things that happen so that you can form your thoughts. You can start from, let's say, highway engineering. You spend 2 months there. And some of you may be going through that experience now. You may have gone through a similar one. 2 months as highway engineering. After 2 months, you move to transportation engineering or transportation and traffic engineering. From there, you go to structural engineering. From there, you go to water engineering. From there, you go to geotech engineering. From there, you go to environmental engineering, sanitation engineering. These are different branches under civil engineering. And there are some consulting firms that do all these types of works. You see, there are occasions where when you left school, you have always thought that I want to be a structural engineer. But when you go through these job rotation, you find out that, oh, in actual fact, I actually want to be a traffic or transportation engineer. I enjoy that kind of work environment more than I've thought would be for structural engineering. So when you go through job rotation, it helps you to be able to, find yourself basically. And when you have found yourself, you can also go deeper so that you have both breadth and depth. So I brought other perspectives to this, and I'm sure you do appreciate the angle that I've pitched it. All right, so before we move on to the next slide, you can ask a question. I saw your hand up. I think it's all right. I can take that question and take the person culture. So if you have a question, you can ask, because I saw your hand up earlier.
Yes, please, it's Naomi.
Yeah, you can ask your question.
Yes, please. Sir, please, given this kind of culture, do we take that, for example, University of Ghana, besides business school and some of the other places, there are other departments that have a mixture of courses. Like when you join the school, you have like 3 different courses: study of philosophy and classics, religions, and then information studies. Then you're allowed to drop one, like as you go on, so you master in one. There are times that some of the combinations, personally, they seem a bit like not linking. Like the way you're mentioning the engineering, they're all part of engineering, but there's different aspects. So you're able to know that it's still about engineering. So with that one, is it like a task culture that the university is doing, or?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Well, that does not come with task culture at all. I know that the argument you are making is the lack of linkages that exists between these areas. But you see, it does not hurt much if they link or they do not link, because it's very possible that somebody may do philosophy and classics, and it is quite varied perhaps from information studies and all that. And I think that the thinking behind this arrangement is that it gives you the 3 distinct areas. It gives you 3 distinct areas for you to experience, so that when you make a choice, it will be much more because it's something that speaks really to your personality or to your aspirations. I would not say that they were thinking of practicing task culture. I think that this was just done as a way of giving various opportunities being made available to students, and then to make a view and to take a decision on it. When it comes to these things, like the different courses that you settle on to as you move along, I think that it opens you up to areas that perhaps you may not have thought about. Perhaps you may have thought that you want to do information studies. But me, the combination philosophy and classics really appeals to me. Okay, so people talk about information studies. Well, I don't know what level of IT is involved there, but I'm sure it will be more of management of information systems and that kind of thing. And so if you go and you look at it, and maybe you went in because that is what you got, or because you think that information studies leans strongly towards ICT in a way, which I'm sure it does. But when you get in there, the kind of ICT knowledge that is being put out there is not what you want to be. You want to get into. You can move into a completely different area, which perhaps may appear much more of interest to you. So the point, Naomi, is that the intention is not necessarily to link it. The intention is to give varied options. But there's also a place for combination that are linked. I see some sense in that arrangement. So it gives you different options for you to think through. And this will work for some people. There are some people who are kind of well-rounded. They know almost everything. When it comes to ICT, they are there. When it comes to conceptualization and concepts and philosophy, they are also there. When you give these people these options, and they themselves will go and select it anyway, eventually, as they start after 1 year, they get drawn to a certain direction, and they may settle for it. So there's a place for it. But you see, in all this, what I see about selection of courses and all that is also about counseling. Unfortunately, if you don't know somebody who can talk to you and give you direction and show you how the world is moving and the direction of the world and what you should be doing, it can also influence you if you're not very firm in your thoughts what you really want to pursue. So This would be my response, that it makes sense to have that different distinction that plays out. But for you to be well directed, you need people who have been there to be able to tell you that if I listen to your story, I think that you should be looking at this. Somebody will come to me with this option, and I'll say to you that, well, I think you should look at information studies. Somebody also will come, and I'll say to you that you look at philosophy classes. Sometimes, if you know what you are looking out for, you can just pick things that people themselves, if they do not know. But based on this question that you asked, my mind also comes to another kind of arrangement, especially in the business school. The business school has some BA admin courses. So, for example, I know of a combination like BA, HR, psychology, and I think Chinese. I think there's a lot more connections between these combinations. HR, psychology, Chinese. Okay, somebody was giving this last 2 years. 2 other people I know. One of them went for HR, psychology as a final specialty. Another person I know went for HR, Chinese. You get it. So the point here is that I think that these ones are much more closer, and there are similar combinations like that in the business school. If you go to accounting, they have courses like accounting, economics, and statistics. You see that there's so much resemblance and linkages in them. If you go to public admin, they have courses like that. These are courses that were in the system, they were phased out and they've come back again. I think those who, since it came back, it's the past 4 years. I'm sure the first batch will be graduating, either they graduated last year or they'll be graduating this year. So all I'm saying is that there are instances where you can draw very firm linkages, and there are also instances where they are very distinct, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I see obviously that it isn't, it's rather more of books and library. Okay, so it was later said that it was called archival studies, but was changed to information study because students weren't taking it up. You see, so if your mind is that you want to go into information studies, you get in there, you see that it is actually managing data and kind of historic information, I imagine. You are right, the counseling before picking courses should really be enforced. It's also important to know people who can help you. Unfortunately, not everybody knows somebody, but that is life. Some will be advantaged always. As you know, the poor will always be with us. Matilda, I see your hand up.
Good morning, Prof. And thank you for giving me the chance. Please, I would like to add to what the question Naomi asked.
Okay.
Okay, please. I studied information studies and philosophy. And interestingly, when I was a student, I thought they were not related until I started working. And then, like, when you are a student, you may not really understand the relationship between some of the courses you do until you start working before you realize that, oh, so this other subject I studied is helping me to do the work better.
All right. So, yes, you are right. It's only when you leave school that you see. And it will interest you to know that, we all have experienced some aspects of this. And that also brings in question our educational system, where you think that this is what you want to do. But okay, sometimes you can't blame it 100% because as you grow, your aspirations and your understanding of things also change. And this will be why perhaps you appreciate something that you never appreciated before. So what Matilda is saying to us is that there are some linkages somehow. But I've also explained to say that even where there are no linkages, it is still not a mistake in my mind, because before you go in for that option, especially when it's not given to you, you may have considered, maybe you have interests across board, you can do this, you can do that, but when you're exposed to the differences, you may then decide and settle on what really you believe you want to do. I get a comment here from Matilda that social loathing is as a disadvantage of task culture. Yes, Matilda, it's very possible that when you work in a team, some are going to work harder than others. But you see, my experience, I've spent most of my time has been in consultancy. I've seen that most times when we work in teams, people play their roles very well. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that some are not going to commit. But when you do that, everybody will know. Okay, everybody will know. And in the private sector, it will certainly have impact on your progression in the organization. It's not automatic as it does happen in the public sector that once I'm part of the team, whether I work or not, I'll be promoted. It does not work like that in the public sector. So I have not had that social loathing thing playing out within the private sector. People work in teams and they all play their very important roles. Okay, they are not the same roles, but they all add up in getting the results. But yes, indeed, it can be a possibility. But then the person who goes that route will pay a price because it will affect you in your career. Betty, I see your hand up. I'll take your question and then I'll move on to Eugene.
Thank you, Prof. Please, in your submission, you mentioned that it's very important that people have an idea what goes on in each unit within an organization. But if you find yourself in an organization where the management is very intentional to make sure that people don't have an idea what happens within other units, to the extent that they make sure you are not having lunch together with people from other units and things like that. Where does that kind of culture fit, please? Is there something like that?
Okay. Well, I really will wonder why the organization will not want people working in the same environment, to get to know each other. I suspect that there are surely some things they are doing which they don't want people to talk. Sometimes it's about even the salaries. Okay. Anytime you have something to hide, it means that there's something that you yourself know that is not right, but it's taking place. So it's very possible that they don't want people to meet together to even talk about possibly salaries that people are on. Now, it's in your interest. I mean, it's in the interest of organizations, especially if you are mindful of succession planning, to expose your workers to all the various activity that goes on, so that you have understanding as to what pertains in the various units. When you get to the top, you appreciate concerns much better than when you do not understand the issues and then you just take decisions. As to where they sit, I'm leaning more towards possibly a bit more of power culture, I see. They are controlling everything, okay, from the center. They are asking people to operate in units. And in fact, the last point is about person culture. Person culture is one of the cultures where we focus on units. So I see person culture also in there. So it's a combination of person culture and power culture to some extent. So I will come back to this again as I wrap up. I'll quickly want to touch on the person culture and I'll pick your question up again. So just bear this in mind, Betty. I'll get back to you.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Oh, I think there was another hand before. After Betty, there was another hand. Okay, I thought there was a hand before. If you have a question, you can ask. If not, I'll just move on and then try and pick the last slide. So if we move on to the last slide, it talks about person culture. Okay. So let me explain this. So person culture basically is a culture that emphasizes individuality. Okay. So let's say you have a clinic, okay, and in the clinic you have, or let's say a hospital. When you get to the hospital, you have a section that deals with internal medicine. You have a section that deals with issues to do with, let's say, pediatrics. You have the gynae section. You have mental health. Okay, you have surgery and obstetrics and surgery. You have these different units under the hospital. When you get into the hospital, one thing you realize that they are, even though they all form part of the hospital, they operate as, they have some level of autonomy. They operate as individual units in a way. Yes, being a hospital, one person's work may feed into the other, but they'll be operating uniquely as individuals within the organization. Okay, so it comes across as a complete organization, but there's strong emphasis on individuality, and in this case, the various units. Let's take the business school, for example. If you look at the business school, you have the University of Ghana Business School, but the University of Ghana Business School is made up of departments. You have Department of Accounting, you have Department of Finance, Marketing, Entrepreneurship, you have Department of Organization and Human Resource Management, you have Department of Public Admin and Health Services Management. You have all these departments under the business school. Even though they will compose the business school, individual units exist and they have complete autonomy. You cannot leave finance or accounting and come and give instructions in my department and vice versa. Even though we work together somehow, we have complete autonomy. So that's person culture. So you say that the individual member is all important. Structure is minimal. See, it exists for the benefit of members. Complete autonomy. For example, group of doctors or consultants. So like the example I gave, you can have a hospital, but there are different units with specialties and they operate as autonomous units, even though they feed into each other somehow. But everybody is a boss in their own units. The advantage is that the individuals benefit considerably. So the units that you belong to, they look out for you to a large extent. They look out for you. And then the unit that you do not belong to, they do not look out for you necessarily. All right. The difficulty with this kind of culture is that it's very difficult to manage the people in the organization. Why? Because they are all experts in their own right. So you have to be very tactful in managing these multidisciplinary teams. So we say that difficult to manage since little control can be exercised over members. If I belong to the gynae team, I'm solely responsible or report to the boss of the gynae team. The medicine boss cannot come and give instructions necessarily. And in fact, if you look at what plays out within the medical space, this is the way they operate. They always operate under units. Even if you have to go, it will rather end up becoming a rotational thing. And this issue about job rotation, upon which leads to a certain interest, it plays up in the field of medicine as well. So you see some nurses that I really like surgery, but as they go through the rotation, they end up settling for internal medicine or maybe mental health. Do you get it? All I'm saying is that because there's so much emphasis on the individuality of the various units, that is what we do for a person culture. So Betty, I see it more also to be a person culture, but there's also a little hint of power culture behind the scenes. But the way you display your thing, see, the reason why I went for the power culture straight is the fact that there's a sense to actually control what happens in the organization and how people even interact. And that is why I will put it between power culture. So there are two cultures at play, person culture and power culture. That would be my final submission on that bit.
It may also be because they are experts, they are Indians, so they prevent the Ghanaians from coming together. I don't know for what reason, but yes.
Okay, so it's an international body, is it? International affair?
Yes. I see. Not per se, but they are Indians and they've set up in Ghana. So they bring their people from there and then they employ a few people here to come together and work.
Okay. So it's also about the orientation of senior managers. That is the point I made about the Egocentric Orientation. It's possible that all that they do in Ghana, if they have, and it's possible they have a similar company from in India or wherever, if India is what you said, or wherever they are based, they are practicing the same culture as it is. And it doesn't surprise me, they have those tendencies. Sometimes they have this mindset that they are more equal than others. They have this orientation, even though they are not. They just think that's why we need more Ghanaian businesses, so that we will be more Ghanaian in ourselves than we currently are. So it's also lack of knowledge, certainly. But when it comes to culture, it's certainly person of power culture, but it's strongly going to be more of power. As you give me further and better particulars, there's a certain sense of wanting to do things in a certain way, irrespective of the consequences that comes with it. All right. So any more questions on what I've said so far? Okay. Yes. So Theophilus, I can take your question.
Gleaning a little from the Indian company perspective, I'm looking at these cultures. How do they fit into our Ghanaian culture? Where, citing example, where in our Ghanaian culture, the subordinate is always at fault or always wrong, even if he has a good case. Or yes, in that setting, how do you bring this organizational culture and then you place it in our Ghanaian culture?
I don't know. So are you just opposing this with Indian culture? Are you saying that the Indians, they operate like the Ghanaians? Or
every company links to its origin. So if it's an American company, they would want to sort of portray the American culture, even if it's in Ghana. So,
okay.
So in our setting where our education and everything is an influx of foreign culture, and we are operating on a Ghanaian soil with a Ghanaian culture, how do you manage these things and not get like the effective with them?
Okay, I think that you made a very interesting point there. You see, the issue of culture, what you are asking, the question you're asking, takes us one notch higher. It takes us to national cultures. National cultures. Yes, there is an impact of national cultures on organizational cultures. Okay, so sometimes the culture of a country permeates the organizational culture. So when you come to these kind of examples, sometimes what we see here will be, or what is being practiced here is likely being influenced. You gave the issue of the American organizations perhaps setting up here. One of the very known things about American firms is individualism. Individualism. They like to be individualistic in their thinking. So normally they do not, even though it's important, they struggle with teamwork, because it's more of my achievements against your achievement. If you look at the American model, it's purely that. Okay, it's purely that. It's about yourself, yourself, and yourself. It's all about individual rights. But if you come to Ghana, we are more collectivists in our thinking. And in fact, this question that you asked, Theophilus, it brings very interesting perspectives. Another point to my thoughts as I keep talking about data. That is the reason why this LGBTQI thing will not succeed, because they are thinking of their individual rights. But you see, you are up against a national culture, which is collectivist. Even where there are differences in opinions, Ghana is collectivist in their thinking. African countries tend to be collectivist. Mm. So they can try their gay and lesbian agenda, but it will never work. Because, and you see, they have this mindset. Look at how this Biden, this leader is thinking, that any country that will not emphasize these so-called individual rights. You see the angle. America is the most individualistic country on earth. Mm. And so that's why they feel that, and they also think that they control the heavens and the earth. So everybody must do what they wish or they think, but it's not going to happen. If you check lately and you check the GDPs, the way things are going, China is overtaking America in a big way. So that kind of assumption that America is the leader of the world is an illusion. But even not me going there, this issue of forcing your individualistic national culture into our collectivist sovereign culture will never work. And I take this opportunity to make this point that if you are for these LG, whatever QI people, it's not going to amount to anything. You can mark it on the wall. It will never stand. And so they tend to preach their individualistic mindset. That's the danger of globalization. As the world becomes closer and closer, some of our cultures are going to be challenged. It is expected that these things will come up, but it's also expected that they will not stand. Nobody is against lesbians and gay and all that. They've always been there. But to become a national agenda, it will not work because our culture frowns on it. And even importantly, it's against the sovereignty of the country. Ghanaians do not subscribe to this thinking. Okay, so it will not stand. So you see how national cultures sometimes have a sense, and the more, and that is why this policy of Ghana Beyond Aid, we should pray that it succeeds. Because who are you to come to my house and tell me what to eat, what not to eat? Who are you? That is what is happening across the globe. The Americans are now telling us to toe a certain direction. And I do hope that our leaders will show the way by being very fair. And anytime I talk about this, the first thing that comes to me is the late President Mills. He was the leader who came out openly to say that you will not be able to alter our culture. So the individualistic culture is an American culture. And therefore, don't be surprised when they find themselves in this environment as a multinational organization. They are going to practice that. I know of a student 2 years back, about 5 years ago. She was working with an American firm. And she was very good. She knew her stuff all right, but she had difficulty because they never consulted her in decisions that they make, even though she was the HR manager for the firm. Everything is being forced down their throats as it is pertaining in the headquarters. And she had a lot of difficulty with that. Some people do not mind. So I told her that, look, it is this kind of egocentric orientation where anything coming from the headquarters is what must stand. The options are two. Either you tolerate and work with them, or you leave the firm. Eventually, she left the firm. So I know that you, Floss, we asked a question, but your question has led us to the direction that we have gone to, that it's more about national cultures. And I will talk about national cultures as we move through this lecture subsequently. But there's a paper that I wrote years back about the impact of national cultures on corporate cultures in organizations. And that paper argues that indeed, national cultures do transcend into organizational cultures. So in short, national cultures does influence. So sometimes when you are working with people who are not from this country and they are moving a certain direction, it's possible that they are just living out what pertains in their cultures. Okay, so that would be my response for now. But when we look at Hofstede's work on cultures, we'll look at all this issue about the subordinate is always wrong and the boss is always right. It's one of the works that was done by Hofstede. So we look at Hofstede's cultural hypothesis, and Hofstede talks about power distance cultures. Power distance cultures is where status is a big deal, okay? And these are the kind of culture that works in our setting. But you also will find out that Ghana is not the most power distance country on earth. There are other countries who are more power distance than Ghana. So this will be my response for now. We will look at Hofstede's cultural hypothesis, and then these things will come up again. So Theophilus, I think I'll give you the last but one, if there's any more question before we end the class. So Theophilus, you have the floor again.
Sir, I have a leading question, but I want, if it won't take time. Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead, yes.
Sir, coming from a Christian background, we always have this key song, but then when it comes to things like the LGBTQ issue, we always revert to our tradition, that this is not Ghanaian. This is not, it's not part of us. In that instance, how do we place the Ghanaian? What really is our culture?
Okay, well, I think that if the very simple answer to you is that when we refer to our culture is how things are done around here, okay? How things are done around here. And in this example that we are using, it is even more serious because it is even enshrined. You know that the Constitution bars these kind of behaviors. So it tells you the importance and the depth of emphasis on that aspect of our culture. And it also interests you to know that I know your question is suggesting that why don't we go and worship the idols as our Nanabo did. But what you must also understand is that the people who are against, even those Ananamo who may have worshipped the idol, they are against this kind of gay thing. The Muslims are against it. It's only the Christians who are against it. Okay, the atheists are even against it. So it tells you how entrenched it is within our culture at a broader level. You see, the truth be told, it might be very fair-minded in our thought that there are aspects of our culture that we do not refer to them because we are not so proud of them. I'm not saying that everything about our culture is perfect. But one thing I want you also to note is that when you lose your culture, you lose everything. That is very important to note. When you lose your culture, and if you have traveled abroad and you stayed abroad for some time, you feel this very more, how important it is to wear your Ghanaian attire, to walking through the streets of whichever country you find yourself. You feel, and when you see somebody wear the same thing, especially in the UK during summer, and you are wearing your very simple Ghanaian attire, and you see another Ghanaian wearing it, or even those who are not Ghanaians, they see the distinction, they see the value of your culture and the kind of association that is brought to bear because of that clothes that you will be wearing. That is where you really feel the Ghanaianness that is in you. So it's not a case of we are picking some cultures and dropping some culture, but this is a kind of culture that is even enshrined in the law. But look, we do not tolerate that. So my response again to you, Theophilus, is that our culture frowns on this big time, and it's going to remain so. It's interesting to know that the Minister of Foreign Affairs designate has also passed the same comment. Adjo Asafo has also said the same thing, that it is against our laws. Kujopon Nkrumah also has said the same thing. We are also waiting for the president to speak his mind because he is the man that we have invested all this power into. So we certainly need to hear from the president as we heard from the late males. That will settle the case, okay? That will settle the case. So if you have the president number, you can give him a call and let him know that this is what I'm saying. On that note, we'll bring the class to a close. So we'll continue next week from where we've left off, and I hope that you've learned something. We are going to go through everything on culture that emphasizes the importance of saying in your journey. So I wish you well, and we can bring the class to a close now. So thank you very much, and we'll see you when we see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to both.